Welcome to the series of Healthcare Scene Google Plus Hangouts, where we sit down with top leaders in healthcare IT. Before we begin, I want to remind those watching live that you can submit your questions on the event page for this Hangout. We'll do our best to answer them throughout the Hangout. Today we have the leadership of Modernizing Medicine with us, Daniel Crane and Dr. Michael Sherling. Daniel Crane is the CEO and co-founder of Modernizing Medicine. Since founding the company in 2010, Daniel has led his team to raise a total of nearly $30 million in funding and to hire almost 185 employees as he works towards his stated goal to modernize medicine. Before founding Modernizing Medicine, Daniel co-founded Blackboard Inc., raising over $100 million in venture capital, and in 2004 helped take the company public on the NASDAQ. And in 2011, Blackboard was sold for $1.6 billion. Dr. Michael Sherling is the co-founder and chief medical officer of Modernizing Medicine. A Harvard and Yale-trained dermatologist, he's led Modernizing Medicine to gain almost 25% of the U.S. EMR market share in dermatology. And Dr. Sherling is responsible for developing and designing the dermatology-based Modernizing Medicine software and supervising the medical arm of ophthalmology, orthopedics, plastic, cosmetic surgery, and I'm going to slaughter this one, otolaryngology. He can correct me afterwards, that's fine. Sorry to all those doctors out there. Gastroenterology and urology software. I'm pleased to have them both here with me today. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, it's a pleasure to be here.
Great to be here.
Great. So, Dan, why don't you start us off? For those not familiar with Modernizing Medicine, give us the one-minute elevator pitch about what do you do and your approach to modernizing medicine.
So the short version is we provide solutions to surgical specialty markets, the ones you just named there. What people don't know is that we're really a data outcomes and analytics company that happens to produce a world-class electronic health record system. But for us, it's always about saving the provider time and capturing structured data to understand what truly works and what doesn't, as far as their treatments go, by measuring the outcomes. And it really is in that structured data that all of the magic can be found. By utilizing an iPad and cloud-based solution, we're able to build predictive models at the micro level to understand for a single provider, what are they likely to do to treat a certain type of patient? How do they describe it? How do they counsel it? What do they prescribe? What labs do they order? All the way down to their procedures, being able to anticipate a suture, a scalpel, an anesthetic, and so on. But then on the macro level, using that same structured data to be able to look at truly population health management, to understand across our thousands of providers who see almost 100,000 patients every day in dermatology alone, what are they doing to treat the patient and what is the measured outcome? And so what we've been able to do is standardize those clinically validated scales, those outcome measures, and be able to look across not a population of a dozen patients with the disease or 100 patients, but tens or hundreds of thousands of patients being treated in a structured way so that we can measure and actually quantify what are they doing and what's working for a certain type of patient population. You do all of those things, you end up saving a provider minutes per patient in their documentation. And by using structured data, we can automate all of the outputs, the notes, the encounter forms, the prescriptions and labs, and so on. But we can also show them how they compare as far as treatment popularity and more importantly, outcome to their peers, all in real time, all on the iPad. It's really exciting.
Nice. So, I mean, we're going to dig into this granular data and really what it means and what you've created, excuse me, with this granular data. And I love talking to EHR vendors. I usually ask them what makes them unique, but this time I think, you know, we're going to take a different approach and talk about what are you doing with the data and how are you making the EHR smart. And we want to talk about your announcement with Watson, but before we get to that, let's talk about your existing products. You know, that you did before Watson, EMA. Sorry, I always say EMA in my head. EMA Outcomes and EMA Rounds products. So how do these products work, and how do they help doctors? You want to take that, Michael?
Happy to. So really, before EMA Outcomes existed, dermatologists across the country didn't have a way to assess disease. We would say things are getting better or getting worse. And better and worse are relative terms, and they mean different things to different physicians. And so like Dan was saying, we took structured, static global assessments of disease, rating things on a scale of 1 to 5. So a 5 would be really bad, and a 1 would be really good. And if everybody speaks the same language, then we all know if a patient's getting better or not, relative to their previous visit. And so we can look at diseases almost like a stock, and you know how a stock is performing, whether it's going up or whether it's going down. And there's a lot of chronic diseases in medicine where we see them every couple of months, and we can look and consume a chart much quicker if we know now they're at a 4 or at a 2 and I gave them this medicine. They're clearly getting better. And instead of
they do this at every visit, they record the outcome? Is that?
They do. And one real unique thing about EMA outcomes is it's physician friendly. So we're not asking the physicians to answer a series of 20 or 30 questions to rate their disease of their patient. We're asking them one question with one click, and that's going to really benchmark their progress. And then all they need to do is click on the EMA outcomes button, and they will see graphs longitudinally over time for the performance of every given disease that they have. It's a snapshot that takes a doctor about 5 seconds to consume instead of flipping forward and backwards in a chart. And then in essence what happens is your clinical practice becomes your own lab, and your patients are not just your patients, but you can get the data from them to treat them more effectively instead of just doing what we all do, which is just read the last note, because we don't have time to flip through an entire chart.
Sure.
There's really two pieces here. There's the EMA outcome system, which as Michael described, is a way to get a view at a glance on a disease-by-disease basis of how have you treated it and what has the patient's outcome been, what has the response been, using very simple scales like a body surface area or a physician global assessment, which would be different per disease, but only take a second or two to enter into the system. And the other is that grand rounds, and that is where they get a snapshot of how do they treat a certain disease, say acne or psoriasis or eczema or alopecia or whatever. It'll show them that, okay, I've treated 3,000 patients for psoriasis, and here's the distribution of different treatments I have prescribed. 23% of the time I'm doing clobetasol and Deodex and methotrexate, whatever it might be. But it shows me what do I historically prescribe. But then there's a column of data right next to that that shows the partners in that practice. How do my partners, my peers, in my same group, treat a similar type of patient? And then the third and final column shows them how that stacks up against everyone else in our system. So showing popularity of different treatments by all the providers. And what this gives people is a sense of what are people doing out there to treat diseases, and what has their experience been in doing it. And what we find is people turn to grand rounds not for the easy medicine. They know what they're going to use to treat acne or psoriasis, but for when they're stumped. So an orphan disease that they don't treat often, they touch grand rounds, and it shows them the 1,000 patients that have been treated for pemphigus and what have the treatments been. Or when I have a patient that hasn't responded to my primary, my secondary, my tertiary prescription, what are the next options? And this is a great way to get at a glance view of what different providers are doing to treat similar patients.
So do you also get to see, okay, maybe, in fact, are there any treatments in there that are 50-50 where 50% of the doctors treat it one way, 50% treat it the other? And then can you tie that to the outcomes and see, oh, maybe this is the right 50%? Have you done that sort of analysis, or can doctors do that?
That's exactly where we're going with this. I mean, the thing about medicine is there's so many treatment options out there, so really, for any given disease, there might be 30 or 40 or 50 different ways to treat it. Even with the same medication, you can treat it differently based on the strengths and the doses. But what's really exciting about marrying the two, grand rounds and EMA outcomes, is now those newer treatments, or those treatments that maybe aren't getting as much exposure but really work better, there will be more transparency to that process, and now we can truly modernize medicine.
So we started showing this data about a year ago after collecting 2.5 years of longitudinal data. And what we found is statistically significant data for the majority of major diseases, but not enough statistical data for some of the orphan diseases to display with confidence, if you will, the outcomes of various diseases. So today, the EMA platform shows you popularity of different treatments, which is just that. It's popularity data, It's not meant to be clinical effectiveness, but it's meant to show you that we're de-identifying and aggregating data together and giving it back to the doctors. The next evolution of that is to show information that isn't just popularity, but actual evidence. And so those two things come together. Today it will show you that 50% prescribe X and 50% prescribe Y. Tomorrow it will be able to show you that the 50% that prescribed Y, their patients on average went from a PGA of a 4 to a 1, whereas the others went from a PGA of a 4 to a 2. And obviously you want to get the lowest PGA possible. So you might prescribe the patient that has, or the prescription that has the clinically more impressive outcome.
And this has a lot of applications in terms of everyone's, complaining the fact that healthcare is so expensive, or that patients come in and see me in practice for so many times before they get better. Well, this is going to just show the evidence that doctors need to get their prescriptions reimbursed or their procedures reimbursed, because there's more evidence to support that it actually works.
And one more point I want to make on this, John, is that most of the decisions being made today, not all, and certainly some people are trying to do the right thing, is being based on claims-based data. So they're buying claims data, which has what you did, and we can correlate cost to what you did, but not whether it worked or not. And so pharmaceutical companies, insurance payers, and others have a wealth of claims-based data where they know for this disease, this was the treatment, we embedded this medical device or we prescribed this drug, but not whether the patient took it, not whether it made the patient any better. And so without outcomes, we're making decisions based on cost, not based on effectiveness, and that has to change.
So you bring up two interesting things. One is as you start to do more evidence-based, results-based information giving, does that put you under the purview of FDA? And the second one is what you said about pharma would love this data. So are you going to be selling this data to pharma, or what's your take on the FDA and pharma and your relationship with them in the future? What do you think that will be?
So I'll take that one, and you can add to it. So we've worked with the FDA to make sure that we're regulated as the right class of device. We aren't doing decision support today because we're not showing evidence, because we're truly just showing facts and
popularity is fine.
We exactly. So we are, if you will, still exploring with the FDA the right level of compliance. So today we are a type whatever device, the lowest level, but we have worked with them to do it.
We're watching you, but you don't have to talk.
My friends at the FDA, thank you for your help. But to the point of working with pharma, so the real value here is to get the information into the decision maker's hands, and that's the provider. As a side effect of this, will we have data that pharma is interested in? Absolutely. But to be honest, the pharma companies think that they have access to all of the data that they need from the dispensaries. But again, that's what was prescribed, not the effectiveness or outcome of it. And so as we start to move away from just showing popularity data, which frankly they have today, they know when their drug is being prescribed, they have access to that data, to what patients actually take, what the side effects are and what the outcomes are, I think pharma should be really interested in this data. But to date, our business model isn't to sell this to pharma. Our business model has been to get this back to the providers. But as this data becomes more important to pharma, certainly that becomes something we can explore, but we haven't done that yet.
Okay.
We are working with the academic community, so building a patient-powered research network around psoriasis, which is a debilitating disease that affects about 7.5 million Americans. And with that, we're able to use a lot of those static global assessments to see how patients are doing. And we're working with the National Psoriasis Foundation on that, as well as several academic institutions.
Nice. So let's talk about the Watson announcement. You announced an integration with IBM's famous Watson. So how does that integration work?
So this is really something to be excited about. So for those that don't know Watson, it's the supercomputer that won Jeopardy, but more importantly, it represents the dawn of a new era of computing. And I realize that sounds awfully grandiose, but it really does. Computing has been deterministic forever. It's been a programmable computer. There has never been a cognitive computer created before Watson. This used to be in the field that was called AI. The AI kind of got a bad rep in the 70s and 80s. But it's back now with a vengeance, and it's being called cognitive because unlike a search engine, which returns results, the person who uses search has to click on the result, read the result, interpret the result, understand the result, and decide to use it. Whereas a cognitive computer, when fed and trained the right information, can come up with an answer. So it understands the information and can use its wisdom to be able to answer questions almost instantaneously, which was evident when it won Jeopardy, right? It was fed Wikipedia, it was drilled on it and trained on it, and then when you ask it a question, it doesn't search, it answers. Right. And so we are one of the first companies in the world. There have been 7 companies announced by IBM, and we are one of those 7 that have access to Watson. And what we have done is we partnered with JAMA for a prototype. And we got 100 articles from JAMA, and we fed it to Watson in the areas of psoriasis and melanoma and atopic dermatitis. And we wanted to see if we could teach it medicine, because it's one thing to answer a question Jeopardy style, where the answer is 1, 2, or 3 words. It's something else entirely to be able to digest heavy medical journals and to be able to understand them and answer questions. But what we were able to prove, even with a very small sample set of content, was that it absolutely can. The answers are much longer. It's typically in paragraph form, but we can ask Watson questions, and it will give us answers about treatments, about outcomes, around what you can and can't do, how often you should order labs. I mean, if the answer is in the content, it can answer the question. And what this enables is a lot more than just a new tool for doctors, and that's a piece of it. Is how do you want to use this technology? And we don't want to use the technology to replace a doctor. We think that the doctor really is the ultimate sort of knowledge base and decider of treatments and courses of action, but that Watson can be a phenomenal assistant for them. And so we created a powered by Watson application called Schema, and obviously it still has the EMA name in there, that electronic medical assistant. But the purpose of Schema is to be able to answer a doctor's questions, to instantaneously cite the body of work it came from and the context of that work, and with one touch allow them to put that evidence in their note. And so it's more than just answering a question. Can I prescribe a shingles vaccine to an immunosuppressed patient, or how often do I need to order liver function tests for someone I give methotrexate to, or whatever it might be. But when I find the answer, and believe me, Watson finds the answer, they touch once, and that entire note, that section, gets cited in their actual visit encounter note. So they're able to practice evidence-based medicine. Now, for them to do that before Watson was possible, but they may only see a handful of patients a day. So in the academic world, that is how you want people to practice. Find the evidence, cite it, put it in your note. But now any doctor can practice evidence-based medicine. So it's able to answer questions instantaneously at the point of care on an iPad. And medicine's more complex than a right or wrong answer like Jeopardy. So there may be a few right answers or a few different possibilities. Sure. And so we developed a really novel interface that allows them to scan through and have a conversation with Watson. It isn't just ask a question, get an answer, because those answers typically lead to other questions. So we have a whole conversation element that you can have as a provider with Watson and be able to cite all the evidence back in your note. It's extremely exciting.
Interesting. It's almost like a footnote to the evidence that helped you make your decision, which puts a lot of context on the note that you're creating.
Right, and imagine the ramifications for insurance, for malpractice, for really anyone that wants doctors to cite their work can now do that. It shouldn't be an additional burden, but the idea here is that doctors that choose to cite evidence in their note should be rewarded for doing so.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, everyone's been looking up information, whether it started with Hippocrates, right, looking up the evidence. They just had no way to say, hey, I did 12 searches and this is what I found, and these are the 4 that I ruled out, and these are the 5 that I considered, and this is the one I chose, and this is why I chose it. Sounds like you're trying to document the work that they're already doing, but do it in a way that doesn't disrupt the workflow, which I guess is their biggest concern.
Right, and the time. I mean, Hippocrates is fantastic, up to date's wonderful. These are great references. But you need to, the doctor, search, find a set of results, start clicking on results, reading that information yourself, deciding on whether it's relevant, and then including it in your note. Right. Whereas what Watson does is all of that for you and give you possible answers, and then you simply use the information it's presenting you with.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if I was playing devil's advocate, I'd argue that what happens when Watson doesn't bring up the information that you should have had and you should have had in your research, and now you gave him the wrong treatment because Watson screwed up and left out something that was important that you should have found.
Yeah, Watson shouldn't be a decision support tool in that way. I think providers need to decide on their courses of treatment and can use Watson to find information. But relying on computers to do a doctor's job is a bad idea. And that is, it's there to help you find the evidence you're looking for, and if it can't, you should still go based on your training and your course of treatment. Just because Google can't tell me what the weather's going to be like today isn't going to change what the weather's going to actually be. So I wouldn't rely on a computer to tell you the answer, but relying on a computer to help you find the evidence on things you were already going to do or to give you new ideas. It's not going to tell you the absence of something, right? So if it's not there, it's not there. But if it is there, it can show you the evidence. It can tell you where it came from, who published it, and the quality of the publishing.
Yeah. Well, doctors are always working with limited information. I mean, they've had that liability for a long time.
In reality, doctors are working with no information, right? I mean, you go to medical school and residency, and you learn a ton about your state of training at that time, and then you go out in the real world and you practice in private practice, and you try to keep up. You do your CME and you go to conferences, but medicine keeps changing, and what you learn when you were in residency may be completely different than what you know today, but you're still operating on what you've learned about 10 years ago. And this is a way to change that because it's cloud, because it's contextual. I can diagnose somebody with psoriasis and get the top 10 things that physicians like me have asked. And maybe those answers 10 years ago are completely different than the way they are today. And now at least I have that evidence because I see 50 patients a day. I can't spend 3 hours looking it all up, but I can spend 10 seconds looking it up for each patient.
Yeah. I'm reminded of a doctor who once told me that he thought the body of medical knowledge is so complex that the human mind just can't comprehend it all. And I think
you have so much space in your brain to hold stuff.
Yeah.
After that, you just can't retain it.
Yeah, and yet we do amazing things with the limitations which we have. So where does this go next? I mean, are you integrating this with the data in EMA itself, or does it use that data, or are you just using articles? And where does this go next beyond just getting information and adding it to your documentation?
Go ahead.
I can start, and then Dan can follow up with me. The initial is really to get doctors to the point where we're actually practicing evidence-based medicine is a huge deal. But you can see where medicine is trending, and you can look at things like PQRS, Physician Quality Reporting System, where we're changing behavior. And even though we're changing the behavior, we don't even know if there's evidence to support the behavior that we're being incented to be changed, right? I mean, doctors are now being paid or penalized to do certain things. Well, schema can be used to back up some of these behaviors, obviously, and physicians who use them and practice evidence-based medicine could get, obviously better insurance rate with carriers because they practice better, more cost-effective medicine. They could get lower premiums on malpractice. They could get CME. They can get help with their maintenance of certification. So there's lots of applications for using the evidence to improve healthcare.
And I'm going to add to that it's the best of both worlds. So the EMA platform is all about structured data, longitudinal data. What we do is de-identify all the patient information, aggregate it with the other patients, and then can look by age, race, ethnicity, treatment, comorbidity, co-treatment on structured data to do data mining and data analytics to find possible outcomes. But even if we were to hit 100% market saturation, right, which you never get to. We have 25% today in dermatology, so we've made a good start. It won't tell you what's coming out of clinical trials. It won't tell you what's being published. So that's the practice of the real world, right? That's evidence of the real world, which today nobody has, and so there's tremendous value in that. But you marry that power with what's going on in the narrative world, in the clinical trials, in the peer-reviewed journals. And now you have the best of the unstructured data married with the best of the structured data, and that is the 360-degree view that physicians really need to make their decisions on. And eventually, to your point, you're absolutely right, that modernizing medicine structured data could even inform Watson further about what the evidence of the real world is happening, what the evidence is, and marry that information with what's being published in JAMA or the JAD or other periodicals, New England Journal, British Journal, all sorts of sources that we're talking to be able to build this great view of here's all the evidence out there, what's relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that will be the day you've made it is when the outcomes data from EMA Outcomes hijacks a clinical trial because you're seeing the outcomes are completely opposite. I guess.
Well, just from a practical point of view, clinical trials are terribly expensive to run and build, and they only look at the most popular, well-funded diseases in a very small subset of patients versus the entire population, the real world, for any given disease, whether there's 1,000 of them out there or hundreds of thousands of them out there. It's nice to be able to have some data on something that's relevant to my patient.
Interesting. Well, we only have a few minutes left, but I need to hit these hot topics, especially the ICD-10 one. I know I wrote an article. In fact, I've written a few articles about modernizing medicine. I'll have to link to them about your unique interface and your approach to ICD-10 that is quite unique. I think people will enjoy reading. But what's your take on the ICD-10 delay, and how did that impact modernizing medicine? I know you guys were ready. You were using it as a marketing tool. It was your baby, and for good reason. So what do you think about the delay?
Well, I mean, I think the delay was unfortunately necessary. I think a lot of the other vendors and hospitals and people just weren't ready, despite their best efforts. So I think a short reprieve, but having a firm date in the future is incredibly important. As you've seen our system, we view ICD-10 like a UPC code. And nobody goes into a supermarket and has memorized all the different UPC codes. They simply put items in their cart and they check out, and everything works. EHR should be the same thing. You add diseases, you have treatments, all of it should be structured data. It should know where on the body it is. The EHR should know if it's the first time or a subsequent encounter. It should understand the context of the disease and be able to compute an ICD-10 code. It's not that hard. Unfortunately, most EHRs can't do that. And even with this extra time they've been granted, my appeal to them, even though they're competitors, is please don't do compendiums, lookups, GEMs, which are your equivalency mappings. Don't do crosswalks. It's going to put so much of a burden on the doctor that it's going to take an already cumbersome process an extra few seconds per disease, and the number of diseases on your average bill is going to go up. It's no longer an average of 4, right? It's an average of 5, 6, 7, or 8. And so to be able to do that and then spend 10, 15 seconds of disease times 60 patients, when it's going to cost you an hour or 2 hours a day just in looking up ICD-10 codes. It's a really bad thing to do. So hopefully more systems will be designed that look or emulate modernizing medicine. Without structured data and the things that we can do, I don't know how that's going to be a reality. But the delay from a corporate perspective certainly helps us in that we'll have more products and more verticals ready to get into the market.
Yeah, well, you actually make a good case to never implement ICD-10 and go straight to 11 because they're not going to be ready, right? What is ready, I guess, for any of it. So
well, ICD-10 is a really good stepping stone, though. I mean, yes, it's an explosion of code, but what it should do is people shouldn't know ICD-10. Like the fact that we have providers and billers memorizing these long 7-digit codes is ridiculous. Nobody has an expectation of memorizing the VIN number on their car or the serial number on their SunPass on the highway or every UPC in the grocery store. Technology does that for you, and we just need the technology in healthcare to do the same thing.
Yeah. I'm not as optimistic that they'll be ready, but I think we'll have plenty of it. In fact, I think most people have put their ICD-10 plans, well, let's finish whatever we're working on, and then we're basically ready once that's done. I don't think they're being progressive. So how about Meaningful Use Stage 2? There's kind of a delay, maybe, depending on who you are. And, how are you approaching Stage 2? You're 2014 certified, so
we're 2014 certified and we're ready, and our users are going to do Stage 2 certification. We're prepared, we're ready for it. I think it's good for those that are stuck on legacy systems that they're not in a bind. So in that respect, I think it's good. But it's also a strong lesson learned for those people that are still stuck on legacy systems to really switch to something that a company that is ready, because it takes a lot of resources to pull up all of these certifications and government requirements, and you really want to use something that is ready.
And it's not going to stop. I mean, there's another stage beyond Stage 2. There's additional PQRS and CQM. If your vendor can't accommodate these technical requirements, then you really need to evaluate if they're the right vendor. The fact that the government has given us 2 reprieves in a year is generous, but if you can't bank on that they will always delay. Unfortunately, as a parent, they do the thing you're never supposed to do, which is give in. But they did, and so now they've lost some credibility. But they need to get it back. They need to stick to their guns on these compliance dates. Otherwise, vendors and customers, providers won't take it seriously.
Yeah. Well, I think they had to do something, because if you doctors attested to stage 2 and everyone decided to take the exception or just forget Medicare or whatever strategy they were taking, they would have had $18 billion they haven't spent, and that's a problem for a government that needs to spend money, which isn't so good. It may describe the state of the program.
Right.
Anyways, any final words before we wrap up?
It's always a pleasure to chat with you. It's nice to be talking with someone who understands the potential impact of technologies like Watson on the ecosystem, that understands the differentiators between a modernizing medicine and the other competitors out there. We welcome healthy competition. Modernizing medicine does things really differently. We save providers a ton of time. That's why we've grown so quickly. Is that, it would be great for me to say, hey, we're modernizing medicine through Outcomes in Watson, but here's a tool and it's going to slow you down 10%. We wouldn't get any sales. But we built a tool that speeds them up so much that they want to use the platform, and it just so happens it can do all these other amazing things.
Ditto on that. You've seen what we've done with ICD-10 and how we've automated it. You wrote a piece on that. Keep an eye out for how we solve PQRS. Yeah. PQRS is like the little stepsister of Meaningful Use that doesn't get enough attention. But in reality, if you don't use PQRS this year, you get a 2% cut in your Medicare fees in 2016. And we have come up with an amazing solution that virtually automates the entire thing. I just did analysis on my own patients. In order for me to answer yes/no questions, which is how a lot of software companies do it, I would have to answer 95,000 questions, which would be weeks and weeks of not seeing patients, which isn't really a viable solution economically, so stay tuned for that. We have a great solution there.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things is PQRS is a preview of the value-based reimbursement, I think, and where we're headed there. And if you don't do PQRS right, I think you're going to pay the price later once they start reimbursing based on value. So I think that's fair. So I thank you so much for taking the time. I probably should have disclosed at the beginning you're an advertiser on my site, so you support my efforts as well. So it's much appreciated. Full disclosure, although I'm interested in what you're doing. I think I'm interested in the trends of the industry. I love what Watson's able to do, and I love that someone's actually putting it into practice rather than saying this is what could happen. So I'm interested to monitor your progress, and thank you so much for joining me.
John, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thank you as well.